Alright, what is up guys? So I have another Zoids review coming, and this one I wanted to do a little bit differently because as you can see, it is the first Zoids Wild kit review I'm going to be doing, and so I've been really looking forward to this. You guys followed all of my progress, and unfortunately I really regret not being more engaged with the community than I already was in terms of updating you guys with Zoids Wild content. The video I made regarding the first manga and the first episode of the anime was pretty well received. And of course, you guys always know me as a Zoids content creator. But the Zoids Wild series kind of premiered, and not a whole lot of great feedback was said about it. I mean, it was okay, but I think most people were like, it's mostly geared towards kids, and didn't really give it too much of a second look. And then the model kits were very curious, so some people said they were worried about them being too much like the Biozoids from Genesis. I never owned any of those, so I don't know quite what they're like. But the reason why I wanted to start this review of the Takara Tomy Zoids Wild Liger motorized kit from the very first initial Zoids Wild line is because I have a unique opportunity to show what this thing looks like in the box. I haven't built it yet, so I wanted to start this review here at this stage so you guys can see what building it is like. I'm not going to do the entire build on screen, of course, but I want to show what everything looks like inside the box. First of all, these boxes are just amazing. It's very minimalistic, very minimal branding down here, and then the entire face of the box is the artwork. I love it. It's also a very kind of narrow box. It doesn't take up that much room. It's only maybe slightly... It's about the same thickness as, you know, your average Gundam Gunpla box, but it's definitely a lot smaller than like the Hasbro Zoids boxes or even the Kotobukiya HMM Zoids. But I really love this design of this box, and you can see, of course, all the gimmicky features on the back. But I just love how the front of it is just dead center artwork. And I already popped the tape seal off over here, so we're going to irrevocably damage this box with a little crease right there, because that's why cardboard boxes kind of suck. And we'll see how this thing is packaged. So one of the things that varies very differently from the Zoids Wild kits compared to the other Zoids kits historically is that the older kits, very similar to the majority of Gundam and other model kit, mecha model kits and so on, those would all come on the little trays on the pages of pieces where you would snap them off. These come in baggies, kind of like Legos or, you know, you name it. So all the pieces are in bags, and we just kind of dump them out and build them. And the motor is right here, looks like. This is a pretty cool little pixelated camouflage design right here on the cardboard insert. Kind of reminds me of like a Minecraft texture. But yeah, everything is in the bags, and of course the bags are numbered with a little stylized character right there. So that's how this thing is initially packaged. All the pieces are kind of loose in here. So we'll get to building this guy, and we'll finish the review from there. Alright, so now we rejoin the construction in progress, and I wanted to show off a couple of things. So obviously the instruction manual and all of the pieces are each in little plastic sleeves. And when you break open the plastic sleeve for the instruction manual, you also get this advertisement brochure that has all of the other Zoids in the initial Zoids Wild line, which there's quite a few of them, and they're all really cool. So I don't have plans to get many of these, except for probably the Tiger, because it's pretty awesome. And there's a retrain of the Wolf for Zoids Wild Zero that I'd like to get. But some of these are really cool. Even the Mulga retrain, which is very similar to the original Mulga, is pretty cool as well. But yeah, these are the ones that initially came out in the first run of Zoids Wild. The other one I have right now is the Gila Raptor, which I will probably build next. And so to talk about the construction of this, I stopped here because I wanted to kind of talk about the design sensibility of this construction. So what they've done is they have all the pieces in little baggies like I talked about, and there's three different bags. There's the A bags, the B bag, and the S bag. The A bags all have the pieces that form the structure and the skeleton like this, and the B pieces form the armor. It becomes the final way the Zoid looks. And the S pieces are like the plugs and the some of the accent pieces that are special and unique. So I kind of want to talk about this as a design sensibility from a construction standpoint. So the actual build process for this was very fast and very easy. I would say it's just slightly easier than one of the old Takara Tomy Zoids or the Hasbro ones. Basically any of the old wind-up ones or motorized ones that you had back in the day. Obviously, it's nowhere near on par with any of the Kodo Zoids, but that kind of goes without saying. So very, 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 very simple. The advantage to having the bags and not the trays, the little pages, is that you don't have to use clippers to snap off any of these pieces, and so all the pieces are molded completely clean, and so that looks really good. The downside is, though, is that because they are in the baggies like that, if you don't want to, I mean, you're not going to dump out the bag because you're not going to be able to find out where each piece is. But you have to like sift through the bag to find the piece that you want that's on the instructions. So that's a little bit annoying, but overall, this build was super, super fast. This was like maybe 30 minutes to get to this point. So very, 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 very fast. So a couple things I want to talk about just at this stage. The tail moves up and down completely on its own. I like that. The switch for the motor is going to be right here. This piece right here is the spring-loaded locking mechanism for the claw that flings over its head, which I have not assembled yet. And then I like how certain pieces are kind of free-floating, and you can kind of see the mechanics of how the motorized function is going to cause the legs to work, because this section right here, the rib cage, is connected to both of the hip joints, and so it's going to move and act as like a piston to have both of the sets of legs move. And then the feet are kind of, they're tight on there because of the plug, but they move up and down like this freely. And I think what that allows is for the Zoid to stand flat-footed regardless of where the motor is in its cycle, which is kind of an improvement on some of the flaws of the old ones, because the old ones, depending on where the motor was in the cycle, where you stopped it, it may strike kind of an awkward pose and be kind of like leaning off to one side a little bit, and that does tend to happen. And then also the mouth as well, the jaw seems to open up freely. I don't know if when we finally get the motorized function and everything fully finished, if there's something that's going to be put in place to interrupt that. But I do kind of like that it has that some additional moving parts, and I think that's more for the functionality of it as a toy. Because if these do seem to be more geared towards kids just by the nature of Zoids Wild and also the nature of these kits. But yeah, just the fact that you have these moving parts, I'm sure it's like a rah-rah, like action kind of pose, because this is meant to be more of a toy. And in that regard, it's very successful at that. Probably not what some of the more hardcore fans wanted, but I think they did what they set out to do very well. So let's go ahead and finish this guy and we'll continue where we left off. So the very next piece that I put on after the previous shot where we just had the skeleton was the, I guess you could say, the saddle piece that's right there behind his neck. And by putting that on, that actually prevents the mouth from opening as far. So when you get about that much of motion, it doesn't like fly all the way back, which makes a lot more sense. But the fact we still have that motion in there is really cool. So here is the Wild Liger complete with the armor on it. And I gotta say, in terms of design, so purely from an aesthetic perspective, the Wild Zoids are pretty friggin' awesome looking. So I really do like the way this guy looks. I thought that when we first had Zoids Wild announced and we saw what this guy looked like, I'm like, all right, it's another classic Liger design. Fantastic. Always great for the protagonists of every series. All the Ligers have always looked awesome. Shield Liger, Blade Liger, Liger Zero, Murasame Liger, and so on have always looked really, really cool. And this one is no exception. A couple things I do like. So I love the color scheme. All of the plastic on this model is molded plastic. None of it is painted. But the white is just so... It's like a very, very slight off-white, and it just holds details that are molded in extremely well. And all the little details just pop out at you, and it just looks fantastic. I like the eyes as well, which is one of the... key things about Zoids Wild, you can see them right there, is that the eyes have definition, and in the anime you can actually see the Zoids have expressions and you can see where their eyes look. That also gives it a much more lively look, and it's like the creature is actually alive as opposed to like a cockpit, which makes it look more like a mecha. So it reinforces that wild design decision to make them look more like wild animals as opposed to machines, which works out. One thing I really do not like about the Wild Liger, though, is he's got these spindly little legs, and when you put the armor on him, he looks like he has some, like, chonky thighs, but he's got these spindly little tiny legs, and it just does not look proportionate at all. I really don't like that compared to basically all of the other Ligers from throughout the franchise. Another gripe I have about the color is actually the feet and the tips of the blades. They are not a very metallic paint or metallic molded plastic at all. I thought they could have done a much better job at making those more shiny. I thought they should have been the same type of metallic color that the eyes are, obviously in gold, but that would have made them look a lot better in my opinion. Overall, it flows together pretty nice, but I think the teeth and the fangs and the tips of the blades would look a lot better if they were metallic like that. I also don't like how the tail has absolutely no armor whatsoever, and it looks kind of small and, again, disproportionate. So, now that I've built this thing, how do I feel about the whole modular, you build the skeleton and then you add the armor on top of it? How do I feel about that? Well, it's not my preference, that's for sure, and I never built any of the Biozoids from Zoids Genesis. A lot of people compare this to, so I'm not really sure how I feel about it from that standpoint, but overall I can't really complain about it too much because it does offer some unique things that some of the older Zoids don't. So for instance, you can set up your dioramas or your little playset areas in a variety of different ways because of the fact that you can have these Zoids in various degrees of battle damage and disrepair by being able to interchangeably take off different pieces of armor. And I think that adds a very cool factor to it. So for instance, if I wanted to, take one of these blades out and like take a shoulder pad off, I could do that and make it look more battle damage. I think that's a cool ability to be able to do that. So the switch for the motor is actually covered by this piece right here, which I think is a really cool looking piece. But yeah, the motor function is simply that right there. And of course I don't have batteries in it. I was actually worried about where the battery access port was on it, and it actually is at the very bottom. So we can access it there with a screwdriver. I'm not exactly sure what batteries it takes. I'm assuming it's AA's, but I'm probably not going to put the batteries in it for this video at all. I really, really love how the main flares out like this in 4 separate pieces. It almost looks like a butterfly shape, but the way it flares out, it just looks awesome. And then finally, let's show off the Wild Blast Striker Claw gimmick, which is the claw on its back. So this is the Wild Liger's main weapon, and the ability that it has when the main character uses the little key thing that he has. So you actually push down on the head, and that, well, never mind. That's what's supposed to engage it, is you push down on the head and it brings that forward. So we'll just do it manually then. So the middle claw is clipped in back here, and the other 2 claws are just kind of resting on top of it, so it swings the whole thing forward like that, and it's pretty freaking cool. Now, I wish that they would... They do kind of flare out a little bit in sort of like a Wolverine claw formation, and then when you pull it back, watch this, they merge together and lay on... They kind of go... They go back and they go like this, which is really cool to see that happen. But it kind of makes me wish that when they would fold out, they would flare out just a little bit more. So, but overall, it's pretty cool. I really can't complain about that too much at all. And I do like the fact that maybe the let's see, the head thing has nothing to do with the motor, because it's not the friggin' command wolf. But yeah, you can raise the head up and down like that. And oh, there it goes. I guess I had to raise it down further for it to... That makes more sense anyway, because the pilot would be out of the way then. So if you raise it down so far, it moves. There's like a part of the rib cage right here I talked about that is underneath the hip joints, and it ratchets forward on this thing on the side of the spring-loaded piece right here that attaches the claw, and that's what actually launches it forward. So I think that's pretty cool. Let's show that off like one more time. Let's bring the head. So if we look at that black peg right there, if we move the head back up, you see when we move it all the way down, that peg goes back. It's that motion right there that does it. Let's peg that back in, and let's do that one more time. That's pretty friggin' cool. So something you guys may obviously notice, one of the biggest gripes with the Wild Zoids is the fact that the pilots are exposed on the back of the Zoid or on the neck like that, as opposed to riding inside of it in a cockpit, which means that in terms of the size of these things, the scale is larger, especially if you compare the size of this little translucent pilot right here to the size of the android pilots from any of the older Zoids. You'll notice right away that that pilot is a lot bigger, which means that in order to make these to scale, these are a lot bigger scale. But in terms of actual size, they're very, very small compared to classic Zoids, and even the models themselves are a little bit smaller. So let's do a quick size comparison right now. I know this is not the typical video setup here. I typically don't do it on a Yu-Gi-Oh mat, especially not my 20th anniversary Utopia mat. I typically do it with a horizontal view of the Zoid, but this has still worked out pretty well. I wanted to show off the box and the building, so here it is next to the Hasbro Shield Liger, and as you can see, the Hasbro Shield Liger is quite a bit bigger. It's taller, it's a little bit more broad, and it's longer, and this is really illustrates what I was talking about with the legs. So I think the Wild Liger would look a lot better if it didn't have these spindly little legs. You can see the difference on the Shield Liger there, how the Shield Liger looks a lot more proportioned. That's my biggest gripe as far as that goes. Here's another size comparison with a new Zoid I have. This guy's got quite a bit of weight to it because it's got quite a bit of die cast in him, but otherwise he's pretty small. And that is the Revoltech Blade Liger Mirage. So Revoltech Zoids are a new type of Zoid I've never reviewed on the channel before, and I'll be doing a review of this guy very soon. He's the only Revoltech Zoid I have, and probably the only one I ever will have, because I love the Blade Liger, and these things are very hard to come by. So it's a fully articulated figure. It's not a model kit at all per se. There's a little bit of assembly required, but essentially it's a highly articulated high-end figure. And as you can see, it's quite a bit smaller than the Wild Liger in this regard. So I think that's a pretty good size comparison model to go off of. We'll review this guy very soon. I'm quite excited about that. And out with the old, as they say, in with the new. Shield Liger goes back in the glass display case. So overall, I like this guy quite a bit. To talk about kind of the history of this kit like I do in most of my reviews. So this is one of the premier Zoids to release with Zoids Wild last year, as you guys are very familiar with by now. This kit has already gone through several different variations, including a clear version. There's also like one with like reddish, like hot pinkish like accents as well. And there's a couple different color schemes for this guy, as well as Zoids Wild has been picked up for an English localization, and Hasbro has picked up the licensing for this guy, so pretty soon we'll get an English release of this kit that you guys can buy over here in the States. Who knows if that kit will be the same as this one? Only time will tell. I'd be willing to bet that it is mostly the same. And as far as the storyline goes for this guy in the anime, I haven't finished the Zoids Wild anime yet, and I probably don't have any intent to continue to read the manga unless the story varies in some significant way, because I said the art was pretty bad when I read that initial chapter. But you guys can either watch the first episode or watch my review of the first episode and see how the Wild Liger kind of fits into the story. But essentially, the main character is a spunky kid that goes out wanting to hunt a wild Zoid and tame it as his own. And the Wild Liger, while very fierce, comes under attack by a bunch of poachers, and he essentially fights them off and stubbornly essentially allows himself to be hurt by getting in front of the poachers to protect the Wild Liger, and the Wild Liger accepts him as his pilot, and they form a partnership. So kind of minimalistic, bare bones, cliche stuff for a kid's show, but it's cool nonetheless. Again, not one of my favorite designs for the Ligers, but I think it has a place alongside them, as all of the Ligers do. So I'm pretty happy about this. I also have the Gila Raptor to review, as I talked about. So kind of my final thoughts about this. I'm overall very happy with it. Now, I think that the Zoids Wild kits, from what I can tell, are made more so to be more like a toy than the older kits, and way more so than the HMM kits. And that being said, I think they've fulfilled their purpose quite well, and I think that this guy has a lot of cool design sensibilities that I think are a step in the right direction. And it is really cool to see a brand new Zoids model kit lineup in 2018, 2019, you know, when the Zoids we know and love some of them have been around since the 80s, and then some of them in the early 2000s, some of them in the mid to late 2000s with Genesis. So it has been such a long time since we've had a Zoids line. It's really cool to see them back and done right. And I'm not upset by the fact that it is a classic old school motorized kit. I mean, I think if anything, you guys out there that are Zoids fans should appreciate that. after all these years, they brought back this franchise, and for the most part, did it the same way, the same old way that they've always done it, by giving us motorized model kits instead of like some other new type of toy that's a cash in on modern trends and trying to conform to a demographic. You know, Zoids Wild doesn't feel like a cash in to me. It feels like more like a passion project, or like they legitimately wanted another shot at getting this franchise right. And the fact that it's getting picked up in the West again is a huge sign. Do I think these kits will be successful with kids? Not really. I think that toys in general are kind of losing their appeal with kids of this generation, and I really don't think that this coming generation will have anywhere near the level of love that people in my generation and some of my friends did for Chaotic Century and New Century Zero when they were airing here in the States in English dub. That being said, I'm really happy that all this is happening, and that as a huge advocate for Zoids and a Zoids fan over the last several years, that loyalty was rewarded with a brand new franchise. So other than the Giloraptor, I don't really have that many plans to review many of the other Zoids. The tortoise-looking one that's basically a cannon tortoise, but it's got the hidden cannon. That one would be cool. Maybe the Brachiosaur if it wasn't so big. I do have the new Beast Liger from Zoids Wild Zero on its way right now. It just shipped out a couple of days ago. And then they finally announced the box art and the release date for the Shield Liger DSCJ HMM, and it looks amazing. I'm so glad I pre-ordered that. I missed out on the Empire Liger Zero, and now that thing is like $200 on eBay, which sucks. Before I forget, there's also the sticker sheet right here, which I'm glad that it's only a couple of little stickers, and they're cool little call signs and everything. I think that's pretty cool. I may put those on, I may not. We'll see. I would kind of like to leave it blank. But anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to subscribe. Make sure to check out my other channel for Yu-Gi-Oh! Related content or any content I make with Michelle. Like the Facebook page. Follow me on Instagram to see new updates. And I constantly post new pictures on the Facebook page of new pickups that I get. And I'll be back with some more Zoids kits coming very soon.